Elizabeth Warren, the Democratic senator from Massachusetts, has introduced her Accountable Capitalism Act, aimed at doing just that, holding capitalism accountable in the wake of the assassination of the United Health CEO.
What happens when you turn this into the billionaires run it all is they get the opportunity to squeeze every last penny.
Yeah.
And look, we'll say it over and over. Violence is never the answer. This guy gets a trial who's allegedly killed the CEO of United Health. But you can only push people so far. And then they start to take matters into their own hands.
Yeah.
The overall goal of the bill is to shift corporate profits away from shareholders and back towards the workers and the company's long-term investments, the way it used to be before C-suite executives prioritized the shareholders and their own pockets over all else.
And we employ just under 10,000,
Well,
and
as
the
I
rest
said,
are
I think
affiliated.
you have control over about 90,000.
I would say not controlled. They choose to work with us.
Okay. Great. Because United Health has bought up every link in the healthcare chain, you're now in a position to jack up prices, squeeze competitors, hide revenues, and pressure doctors to put profits ahead of patients. United Health is a monopoly on steroids. The opportunities for price gouging are everywhere.
On her website, Warren lays out her plan. And by the way, if you're wondering how she managed to put this whole thing together so quickly, she didn't. She had originally released this plan back when she was running for president. We could have had Liz, but now all we have are concepts of plans. Anyway, here's what she has to say. Wealthy shareholders of giant corporations have gobbled up trillions of dollars in surging profits. Giant corporations must focus more on their interests of their workers, not just their wealthy shareholders. And you know she's got some numbers. She explains that back in the 1980s, the Reagan years, companies began to focus more, seemingly exclusively, on maximizing shareholder value. She says, this shift is a root cause of many of America's economic problems. In the early 1980s, America's biggest companies dedicated less than half of their profits to shareholders. More recently, they have sent 93% of their earnings to shareholders. That means trillions of dollars that might have otherwise gone to workers or long-term investments have gone to shareholders instead. As a result of this shift, she says workers' wages have stagnated, foreign competitors have been able to thrive in our markets, and the rich in this country have gotten so much richer than they reasonably should have. According to her website, 84% of American-held shares are owned by the richest top 10% of families, while more than 50% of American households own no stock at all.
Elizabeth Warren obviously understands killing and murder and shooting somebody in the back is totally unacceptable. What you have seen rising up is people's anger at a health insurance industry which denies people the health care that they desperately need while they make billions and billions of dollars in profit. But I think what we need to ask ourselves when we talk about health care is why we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people, why we have a life expectancy which is significantly lower than in other countries, why working class people die 5 to 10 years shorter than the people on top.
You know, what stood out most about Bernie's defense of Warren was his ability to shift the focus back to the reality millions of Americans are facing every day. But let's take a moment to analyze Kristen Welker's framing of the question. By implying that Warren's comments were inflammatory, she played directly into the defenders of the ruling class who refuse to recognize the struggles of regular Americans while shielding the systems that perpetuate inequality.
Elizabeth Warren, Chris Murphy, Bernie Sanders listening way too much to the online left. But you're right, like they are just very lost on this right now, Democrats, and they are just trying to shoehorn a policy argument into a cold-blooded murder, and it boggles my mind.
Anytime you have to have but after a statement that's about a cold-blooded murder in broad daylight, there is a problem. And these statements are gross and abhorrent, and they should not be out there. Two things can be true, right? This is a murder that is horrible and awful, and there also could be a need for a policy debate. Do not use a cold-blooded murder to have that policy debate. It is gross that they are doing that.
Now, you may be wondering why a former Tim Scott presidential campaign advisor and a former Biden communication staffer are in complete agreement in condemning Warren and Bernie. Well, the reason becomes clear when you realize They're both defending the same political and financial system. When you strip away party lines, what they're really protecting are the interests of the ruling class and the corporations that fund them.
Never before has there been so much concentration of ownership, sector after sector, power of Wall Street, and never before in American history, and we better talk about this, have the people on top had so much political power.
It's really important that we take a step back. This is not to comment, and this is not to say that an act of violence is justified, but I think for anyone who is confused or shocked or appalled, they need to understand that people interpret and feel and experience denied claims as an act of violence against them. When we kind of talk about how systems are violent in this country, in this passive way, our privatized healthcare system is like that for a huge amount of Americans. I mean, I did not have health insurance until I got elected to Congress.
The American public's reaction to the shooting of United Health CEO Brian Thompson is not a partisan issue. It's a class issue. People from all political backgrounds have had firsthand experience or know someone who has of getting screwed over by the healthcare industry. And the media knows this. And that's why they are so desperate to shield the corporations that pay their bills from valid criticism while protecting the financial interest of the people behind them.
Corporate greed is nothing new. The rich enriching themselves while unapologetically contributing to widespread wealth inequity is nothing new. And the long-term repercussions of that inequity is nothing new. No society can survive and thrive with a working class that isn't supported or happy. Pizza parties don't cut it. Return to office mandates don't cut it. Antitrust laws that go unenforced don't cut it. And out-of-touch delusional CEOs do not cut it. Warren's plan has four main components. The first, American corporations bringing in over $1 billion in annual revenue would be obligated to consider the interests of all corporate stakeholders, not just the shareholders. This is something that 33 states and the District of Columbia already have in place, and several large, successful, and reputable corporations already operate this way, including Patagonia. She also wants more democracy in these large corporations, pushing for at least 40% of company board members to be elected by workers. Other developed countries already have systems like this in place. She'd like to see restrictions put in place against directors and senior executives selling their shares, removing financial incentives for them to inflate the stock price and focus solely on maximizing shareholder value. And finally, she proposes that large corporations receive approval from 75% of shareholders and 75% of directors before engaging in political expenditures. The idea is that with an elected board, the workers will have more of a say, however indirectly, in how their company spends its money on political donations, lobbying efforts, etc. Of course, this bill isn't likely to go anywhere, especially not with a Trumpian Congress incoming, but it's still nice to know that someone in Congress is looking out for workers.